The sea is a realm of mystery, where countless ships have sailed into the unknown, only to vanish without a trace. Among these stories are those of ghost ships, vessels that roam the oceans without crews, appearing and disappearing without explanation. These ships are not just abandoned vessels. They are haunted by the unspoken fates of their crews, cursed by forces beyond understanding. From the Flying Dutchman, doomed to sail forever, to the Mary Celeste, found abandoned but still seaworthy, these eerie tales are steeped in fear, the supernatural and the unknown. The sea holds its secrets close, and the ghost ships that haunt its waters remain timeless mysteries, waiting for those brave enough to seek the answers. Join us as we delve into these chilling stories, where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural blur, and the ocean's darkest secrets remain just out of reach. The SS Baychimo, the ship that wouldn't die. It was a bleak, cold morning in October 1931 when the SS Baychimo, a once proud cargo vessel, found herself caught in a brutal winter storm off the coast of Alaska. The ship had been sailing the icy waters of the Arctic, navigating treacherous waters filled with pack ice. For weeks, her crew had braced against the bitter winds and freezing temperatures, unloading fur supplies for trading posts and securing goods for the long winter. The Baychimo, built to handle the harsh conditions of the northern seas, had served admirably for years, but nothing could have prepared her or her crew for what was about to happen. The storm came without warning, catching the Baychimo off guard. The sky turned an ominous shade of gray, and heavy snow fell in sheets, reducing visibility to near nothing. The crew scrambled to maintain control, but the wind howled like a beast, and the ship was soon trapped in a massive ice floe. The Baychimo groaned as the ice pressed against her hull, her movements slowing, then halting altogether. Captain Larson, a seasoned mariner with decades of experience, stared at the shifting sea with a sense of helplessness. The ice was thick, too thick for the ship to break free. He gave the order to abandon ship. With no other options and the storm worsening by the minute, the crew had little choice. But even as they boarded their lifeboats and rowed away from the Baychimo, a strange feeling lingered in the air. The ship did not seem like a helpless vessel in distress. It seemed alive, as though something within the ship refused to let go, as if it were tethered to the frozen waters with an unseen force. Days turned into weeks, and the Baychimo remained marooned in the ice. Word of the abandoned ship spread quickly, but by the time a rescue operation was launched, the Baychimo had already begun to show signs of an unnerving resilience. Though the crew had departed, and despite the thick ice surrounding her, the ship had not sunk. The Baychimo was, in fact, still afloat. Months later, after several failed attempts to salvage the ship, a remarkable and unsettling report surfaced. A nearby vessel, the Alaskan Star, had sighted the Baychimo floating once again, drifting across the Arctic waters as if she had been set adrift by some invisible hand. Her sails, still intact, caught the wind, and her masts seemed to sway in time with the rhythms of the ocean. Only there was no crew to operate her. There was no sign of life aboard. The ship moved as if pushed by some unseen force. But the Baychimo was no ordinary ghost ship. Over the course of several decades, she would reappear time and time again, drifting aimlessly through the icy waters of the Arctic, only to vanish once more. Each time the ship would appear without warning, sailing through the dense fog or drifting slowly along the icy shoreline. Her hull, though battered and worn, appeared somehow indestructible. Her crew was never seen again, and the ship seemed to defy both time and logic. In 1933, a strange thing happened. A group of explorers who had come to the Arctic in search of the Baychimo reported that they had come close to boarding her. They had seen her drifting at the edge of the ice floe, but as they attempted to approach, the ship suddenly began to drift away from them, slowly, but purposefully. It was as if the Baychimo was actively avoiding them, pulling farther into the mist and fog, as though it had a mind of its own. Despite their best efforts, the explorers never made it on board, and so the sightings continued, decade after decade. Fishermen, whalers, and explorers all reported seeing the Baychimo, but no one could get close enough to examine her. Some even claimed that they had felt a strange, cold presence aboard her, as if the ship was not just a piece of inanimate wreckage, but something more, something alive. The final known sighting of the Baychimo was in 1969. A group of sailors, tired and weary from a long journey, thought they had seen a ghost. The ship appeared, drifting slowly through a thick fog. Her silhouette was almost indiscernible, the masts swaying gently as if the wind was guiding her. Yet, as the sailors drew closer, the ship disappeared once again, vanishing into the icy waters like smoke. That was the last anyone ever heard of the Baychimo. After 38 years, the ship and her crew were never seen again. What was the Baychimo? A ship cursed by the sea? A ghostly vessel that wandered the waters, trapped in time? Or was it something else entirely, an enigma too deep for human understanding? Some say the Baychimo still drifts out there, moving silently across the ice, waiting for the next sailor to cross its path. The ghost ship of the Ticonderoga. The year was 1957, and the Ticonderoga, a majestic passenger liner, was setting sail from New York to Boston. She was a well-known vessel, her sleek hull cutting through the waters of the Atlantic like a knife. On board were passengers eager to reach their destination, a crew ready to fulfill their duties, and a promise of a smooth and uneventful journey. But the sea, as always, held secrets, and on that fateful night, the Ticonderoga would soon become a part of a mystery that still haunts the minds of those who heard the tale. The ship departed from New York Harbor on a crisp February evening, with nothing unusual on the horizon. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the waters, and the night seemed almost peaceful. Passengers gathered in the lounges enjoying their dinner, and the crew moved about their duties, unaware of the impending tragedy. But by morning, when the first rays of sunlight crept over the ocean, the Ticonderoga was gone. Gone without a trace. No distress signals, no wreckage, no sign of anything amiss. The radio silence was absolute, and when the ship failed to arrive in Boston as scheduled, a search was immediately launched. But despite the frantic efforts of nearby vessels and Coast Guard planes, there was no evidence of the Ticonderoga, not a single scrap of wood, no sign of wreckage, not even a whisper of a clue. For weeks, rumors and speculations swirled. Was it a pirate attack? A violent storm that had claimed the ship? But none of those explanations seemed to add up. The weather had been clear, the seas calm. There were no other ships in the vicinity, no signs of foul play. The mystery grew darker with each passing day, and still no trace of the Ticonderoga was found. Then, in the years that followed, strange reports began to surface. Sailors from various ships began to speak of an eerie phenomenon, a large, ghostly vessel, bearing a striking resemblance to the Ticonderoga, drifting through the fog off the coast of New England. The ship would appear without warning, its form emerging from the thick mist, its lights dimly flickering. But it was always the same, silent, unmoving, and completely devoid of any crew. As time passed, more and more sailors reported sightings of the phantom ship. Some claimed to have seen her from a distance, appearing on the horizon and then vanishing into the fog as quickly as she had come. Others described how they had approached the ship, only for it to disappear before their eyes, leaving no trace. One such report came from a freighter crew who encountered the Ticonderoga in the dead of night. They described her as a dark silhouette against the mist, her sails billowing in the wind, but with no sign of life aboard. As they drew closer, they could feel a palpable sense of dread in the air, a coldness that seemed to seep into their bones. But it wasn't just the eerie silence of the ship that unnerved those who encountered her. It was the sense that something was wrong, something that couldn't be explained. Some sailors spoke of hearing faint, disembodied voices coming from the ship, as if a conversation was taking place far away, just beyond the reach of hearing. Others claimed to have seen strange lights moving along the deck, as though a crew was still aboard, though no one was ever seen. The ship would appear in the dead of night, only to vanish by morning, leaving only confusion and a lingering sense of dread. The sightings became so frequent that the Ticonderoga took on the status of a legend, a ghost ship that sailed the foggy waters between New York and Boston. To see her was said to be an omen, a bad sign that foretold tragedy. Some even believed that the ship had become trapped in a time loop, a cursed vessel doomed to sail the oceans forever. But what was the cause of her disappearance? Why had she vanished without a trace, and what malevolent force was keeping her afloat, drifting endlessly through the fog? As the years passed, the stories grew darker. Sailors who had encountered the ghostly Ticonderoga spoke of feelings of unease, of being watched by unseen eyes. Some even claimed to have seen figures moving along the deck, shadows that passed in and out of view, though no one had ever boarded the ship to see who or what these figures were. Was it the crew, still trapped in some otherworldly purgatory? Or was it something far worse, an ancient curse that had claimed the ship and its passengers, forever binding them to the sea? In 1963, a fishing trawler reported a sighting of the Ticonderoga off the coast of Cape Cod. The crew described the ship as being in perfect condition, despite the years of exposure to the sea and weather. But when they tried to get closer, the ship began to drift away, almost as if it were intentionally eluding them. As the trawler's captain later recounted, the ship moved with an unnatural, ghostly precision, slipping silently through the water, as though it were being controlled by some unseen force. The trawler's crew could feel an overwhelming sense of fear and panic, as if they were being drawn into the ship's orbit, pulled toward it like moths to a flame. But before they could get any closer, the Ticonderoga vanished into the fog, as though it had never been there. The last known sighting of the Ticonderoga was in 1969, when a group of fishermen reported seeing her once again, drifting silently through the mist off the coast of Maine. The ship was still intact, though her once pristine condition had faded into a shadow of her former self. The sailors who saw her spoke of an overwhelming sense of sorrow and hopelessness that hung over the ship, a darkness that seemed to seep from her very hull. And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, the Ticonderoga vanished into the fog once more, never to be seen again. No one knows what happened to the Ticonderoga. Did she sink that night, and her ghost return to haunt the sea? Or is she still out there, drifting endlessly through the mist, a lost vessel trapped in time? Sailors still speak of the Ticonderoga in hushed tones, warning each other to stay clear of the waters where she was last seen. To encounter her, they say, is to be marked by an inescapable fate, one that can never be outrun, one that waits patiently for those brave enough, or foolish enough, to sail into the fog. The Carroll A. The Vanished Crew. It was the dawn of January 31st, 1921, when the Carroll A. a majestic five-masted schooner, was last seen, drifting eerily off the coast of North Carolina. She had been making a routine voyage from the port of Norfolk, Virginia, carrying a load of coal to deliver to the West Indies. But as the ship sailed into the treacherous waters of the Cape Hatteras area, the Carroll A. would slip into a nightmare that would forever haunt the pages of maritime history. The Carroll A. was an impressive vessel, with sleek lines and a reputation for being a reliable and sturdy ship. She had a seasoned crew, led by Captain William Merritt, a veteran mariner with years of experience on the seas. But something dark hung over the ship in the days leading up to her disappearance, an unshakable sense of dread, a feeling that the sea itself was watching, waiting for something. By January 29th, the ship had completed her delivery and was preparing to head back toward Norfolk. The weather had been rough for days, with fierce winds and a storm brewing on the horizon. Captain Merritt, determined to make it home, gave the order to press onward despite the warnings. The Carroll A Deering would be the last vessel to make it through these waters that winter. Yet, as the crew pressed on, they would not know that the ship would become part of a mystery that would baffle authorities for years to come. On the morning of January 31st, the Carroll A Deering was spotted by another vessel, the Rosa, off the coast of Cape Hatteras. The ship was heading in the wrong direction, seemingly aimlessly adrift. What was even stranger was the state of the ship. Her sails were set in a peculiar way, as though they had been tampered with. And there was something even more unsettling. The ship appeared completely empty. No crew were visible, no sounds of activity, not a single sign of life aboard. The Rosa tried to radio the Carroll A Deering to check for distress, but there was no reply. The schooner continued drifting, her sails flapping in the wind, her masts swaying as if some unseen hand was guiding her through the waves. And then, as if to seal her fate, the Carroll A Deering vanished into the fog, disappearing from sight. It wasn't until the next day, when the Carroll A Deering failed to arrive in Norfolk as expected, that her disappearance was confirmed. A search was launched immediately, and for weeks, investigators scoured the waters of Cape Hatteras. What they found was nothing short of horrifying. The ship was located on February 2, 1921, and what was discovered on board left investigators stunned and deeply unnerved. The crew, 11 men in total, was gone. No sign of struggle, no bodies. Their personal belongings, including their clothing, remained undisturbed. The ship was in perfect condition, as though it had been abandoned in a hurry. The ship's log, too, was found, its last entry made on January 29th, describing nothing unusual, no storm, no trouble, no warning. But it was the state of the ship itself that sent chills down the spines of those who boarded her. The sails were set as if the ship had been preparing for a journey, but with no one at the helm. Below deck, the galley was stocked with food, as though the crew had planned to return to it at any moment. The personal effects of the captain and the officers were all in place. Yet the crew was gone, vanished without a trace. In the days and weeks that followed, the mystery deepened. Search parties scoured the surrounding area, but there was no evidence of a struggle, no footprints in the sand, no lifeboats found adrift in the waters. It was as if the crew had simply vanished. Not one single clue was left behind to explain their disappearance. And then, the most disturbing reports began to surface. Sailors from nearby vessels began to speak of strange encounters with the Carroll A Deering in the weeks after her discovery. The ship, they said, seemed to appear out of nowhere, drifting silently through the fog, her sails set and her masts swaying in the wind. But there was something wrong, something off. The ship would appear and disappear, vanishing without warning, as if it were trapped in time. The crew never returned. The ship continued to drift, aimless and silent, through the waters of the Atlantic. The sightings grew more frequent as the years went on, with different sailors reporting similar encounters. Some said the ship seemed to be following them, drifting in their wake for days on end before vanishing into the mist. Others claimed to hear strange sounds emanating from her, whispers or cries in the night that chilled them to the bone. The Carroll A Deering had become a ghost ship, a floating enigma that seemed to be stuck in a world between the living and the dead. By 1922, the sightings stopped altogether. Some say the ship finally sank, consumed by the very waters she had once sailed so proudly upon. Others believe that the Carroll A Deering is still out there, drifting across the ocean, carrying the restless souls of her vanished crew. No one knows for sure. But the mystery of the Carroll A Deering remains unsolved. What happened to the crew? Was there a mutiny, a storm, a supernatural force? Or was the Carroll A Deering cursed from the start, doomed to sail the seas for all eternity, her crew lost to the winds of fate? Some say it was a haunting, a curse laid upon the ship long before her voyage began. Others whisper of a dark force, an ancient evil that claimed the souls of the crew, leaving the ship to sail without them. There is no conclusion to the story of the Carroll A Deering. There are only questions, unanswered questions, that will never be solved. And so the ship remains, a ghostly silhouette on the edge of the horizon, forever drifting between the worlds of the living and the dead. Her story is a warning to those who venture too close to the mysteries of the sea, for in its depths something stirs, and it waits. The Flying Dutchman. The Eternal Voyage. The winds were howling, the sea tossing and turning with a fury that only the most seasoned sailors dared to face. It was a storm like no other, a tempest of unnatural strength, as though the very ocean itself had been possessed by some dark, malevolent force. And amid the chaos of the waves and the thunderous roars of the storm, there appeared a ship, a ghostly vessel that should not have been there at all. Her masts reached high into the sky, her sails billowing as if filled with wind, though no breeze touched the air. And as the storm raged on, the ship seemed to move with a purpose, its eerie glow illuminating the waters in the dead of night. This was no ordinary ship. This was the Flying Dutchman, a cursed vessel that had been doomed to sail the seas for all eternity, never to reach port, never to rest. Its story is one that has been passed down through generations, a tale whispered by sailors who have dared to speak of the legendary ghost ship, and one that has never been fully understood. The legend of the Flying Dutchman begins in the 17th century, when a Dutch captain by the name of Hendrik van der Decken set sail on a voyage from the Netherlands to the East Indies. The ship, named the Vrouw Maria, was well built and heavily armed, designed to make the long journey to the farthest reaches of the world. The crew was experienced, the cargo valuable and the mission clear, to reach the East Indies and return home with riches. But as the ship sailed into the waters of the Cape of Good Hope, disaster struck. The winds turned against the Vrouw Maria, and the storm that had been gathering strength suddenly burst forth, fierce and unrelenting. The waves were monstrous, towering over the ship, threatening to capsize her. The crew was frightened, and many began to pray, clutching at their rosaries and calling out for mercy. Captain van der Decken, however, was unyielding. He cursed the storm, demanding that the ship press on through the fury of the ocean, determined to make it to port. As the storm raged, the crew begged him to turn back, but the captain's stubbornness knew no bounds. He swore that he would reach his destination, no matter the cost. "I will sail this course until the end of time itself," he proclaimed. "I will reach the East Indies, or die trying." But his defiance would be his undoing. The sky seemed to darken even further, and with a terrible crash of thunder, a voice, deep and otherworldly, boomed from the heavens. "You shall sail these waters forever and never reach land again. You are cursed, Captain van der Decken. You and your crew are doomed to sail the seas for all eternity." And with that, the Vrouw Maria was doomed. From that day forward, the ship was never seen again, not in the normal course of time. The storm seemed to lift, but the Vrouw Maria disappeared into the mist, vanishing from the world as if swallowed by the sea itself. The crew was lost, and no one knew what had become of them. But strange things began to happen shortly afterward. Sailors who had been crossing the same waters began to report seeing a ship that looked remarkably like the Vrou Maria. Though there were no other ships in the vicinity, no reason for such a sighting. The Flying Dutchman had come to life. The ghostly ship was said to appear in the distance, its sails billowing despite the lack of wind, its masts reaching high into the sky like the fingers of a skeletal hand. It would appear without warning, and then vanish as quickly as it had come. But it was not just its eerie appearance that unnerved those who saw it. It was the ship's unearthly presence. Those who encountered the Flying Dutchman described feeling a chill in the air, a sense of impending doom that seemed to hang in the atmosphere like a suffocating fog. The ship would drift closer, but just as one thought to approach, it would dissolve into the mist, vanishing into the horizon as though it had never been there at all. Many sailors claim to have seen the Flying Dutchman during the 18th and 19th centuries. One of the most famous sightings occurred in 1835 when the British ship HMS Buccaneer was sailing off the coast of South Africa. The crew reported seeing a strange ship through the fog, her sails full, though there was no wind, her outline unmistakable. Captain Thomas Ryrie ordered his crew to approach the mysterious vessel, but as they did, it vanished before their eyes, disappearing into the mist. The crew was left stunned and fearful, unable to comprehend what they had witnessed. The legend of the Flying Dutchman had once again resurfaced, and the stories of its haunting continued to grow. There are those who claim that the Flying Dutchman still sails to this day, her cursed voyage never ending. Sailors who have ventured too close to the ship report hearing faint cries carried on the wind, the voices of the lost crew begging for release. Others speak of seeing the ghostly figure of Captain Van der Decken at the helm, his face twisted in a permanent scowl of anger and frustration, trapped in a never-ending cycle of damnation. Some say the ship sails the waters of the Cape of Good Hope, while others believe it roams the entire globe, appearing and disappearing at will. And while some who encounter it are spared, others are said to be marked by the curse, doomed to die in mysterious and tragic ways. The most chilling aspect of the Flying Dutchman is the prophecy that surrounds it, the warning that anyone who encounters the ghost ship is doomed to an untimely death. Sailors throughout the centuries have reported seeing the ship appear just before disasters, before ships are lost at sea, or before crews are struck down by illness or misfortune. The Flying Dutchman has become an omen of death, a harbinger of doom that carries with it an aura of inevitability. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Flying Dutchman legend is the question: why does she continue to sail? What keeps the ship moving through the seas, year after year, century after century? Some believe it is a punishment, a divine punishment for Captain Van der Decken's arrogance and defiance of the natural order. Others believe it is the work of dark forces, of spirits trapped between this world and the next, doomed to sail forever. Some say the ship is a metaphor, a warning for those who seek to challenge fate, to defy the powers that govern the natural world. Whatever the truth may be, the Flying Dutchman remains one of the most enduring and terrifying legends of the sea. A ghost ship that defies all explanation, a cursed vessel whose fate is intertwined with the very winds and waves of the ocean. She sails on, never resting, never reaching her destination. Her crew is lost, her captain trapped in eternal torment, and her curse unbroken. The Flying Dutchman is a reminder that the sea holds mysteries that can never be fully understood, and that some stories are meant to be feared. And so, the Flying Dutchman continues her journey, forever drifting across the endless horizon, always waiting for the next sailor to cross her path. A ghost ship, a lost soul, and a legend that will never die. The Mary Celeste, the abandoned ship of the Atlantic. It was a cold, foggy morning on December 4th, 1872, when the Mary Celeste, a ship destined for maritime history, was discovered floating aimlessly in the Atlantic Ocean. The ship was found by the crew of the Dei Gracia, a British merchant ship, 600 miles off the coast of the Azores. The sight of the Mary Celeste was strange and inexplicable. Her sails were set, her course was steady, and yet she was empty. Not a single soul was aboard, no signs of struggle, no wreckage, nothing. The Mary Celeste was no ordinary ship. She had been a sturdy brigantine, well-maintained and known for her reliability. Captain Benjamin Briggs, a seasoned mariner, had sailed her many times before, and the crew was a carefully selected group of men with years of experience. They had set out from New York on November 7, 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy, with a cargo of industrial alcohol. The weather had been clear, the seas calm. There was nothing in the world that could have foretold the eerie fate that awaited them. The ship was found, as if she were still a living thing, a ghost sailing through the water without any reason, a ship in perfect condition but utterly lifeless. The Dei Gratia's captain, David Morehouse, was the first to board the vessel, and what he found was both perplexing and terrifying. The Mary Celeste was eerily intact. The ship's logbook was still on board, with entries up to the day the ship was found, all of which described calm seas and nothing out of the ordinary. The ship's cargo hold was full, and the cabin was in disarray, as though the crew had left in a hurry. The ship's lifeboat was missing, which seemed to indicate that the crew had abandoned ship. But why? What had caused them to leave a perfectly seaworthy vessel in such a hasty and unexplained manner? There were no signs of a struggle. There was no evidence of violence or foul play. The ship's personal belongings were left behind, with Captain Briggs's wife and daughter's things untouched. The crew's personal effects remained, as though the ship's occupants had simply vanished. A chill ran through the Dei Gratia's crew as they realized something was horribly wrong. The ship's log, the last recorded entry dated November 25th, mentioned nothing unusual. In fact, it was a typical entry for a ship at sea. Nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of distress. And yet, the Mary Celeste had been found completely deserted. No crew, no Captain Briggs, no sign of what had caused them to abandon ship. The most puzzling aspect of the Mary Celeste's story was the condition in which she was found. There were no indications of a storm, no signs that the ship had been involved in any sort of disaster. She was floating calmly on the water, as though waiting for someone to return. The ship's compass was missing, and the ship's rudder had been damaged, though it was unclear when or how. But again, there was no sign of struggle or distress. So what happened? What had caused the crew to abandon ship in such haste? Over the years, theories about the disappearance of the Mary Celeste have run the gamut from the plausible to the supernatural. Some believe that the crew was caught in a sudden and violent storm that struck without warning, forcing them to abandon ship. Others have speculated that the cargo of alcohol had somehow caused an explosion or leak that created a terrifying but non-lethal situation, forcing the crew to leave the ship in panic. But the most chilling theories revolve around the possibility that the crew was driven to madness or fear by something far darker. The idea of a supernatural presence on board the Mary Celeste has captivated imaginations for generations. Some say the crew was cursed and that the ship was doomed from the start. Could it have been a ghost ship before it was even abandoned? Or was the ship haunted by some malevolent force that caused the crew to flee into the unknown? Perhaps the most unsettling theory is that the crew of the Mary Celeste was driven mad by the isolation of the open sea, overwhelmed by the endless horizon and the knowledge that they were beyond the reach of civilization. There are stories of sailors who have gone mad at sea, driven to madness by the monotony of the waves and the pressure of the deep ocean. Could it be that the crew of the Mary Celeste simply lost their minds, abandoning ship in a fit of panic or hysteria? However, no matter the theory, one fact remains. The crew of the Mary Celeste was never found. Despite multiple investigations, no bodies were ever recovered. The ship herself remained as a silent witness to the mystery, abandoned but perfectly seaworthy, her sails billowing in the wind as if to beckon the crew to return, yet no one ever came back. Even the most experienced investigators couldn't make sense of the situation. The ship's disappearance has baffled experts for over a century. Theories abound, but none explain the disappearance of Captain Briggs and his crew. Were they victims of a violent act, or did they succumb to the inexplicable forces of the sea? Were they simply lost, or did something sinister drive them away from their ship? There is no answer, no explanation, and no closure. The Mary Celeste continues to drift through the fog of history, a ghostly reminder of the ocean's mysteries, of the unexplained disappearances that lurk in the depths. Some believe she still sails, silently cutting through the waves, her crew lost to time, waiting for someone to solve the riddle of what happened that fateful day. For those who dare to venture out into the vast expanse of the Atlantic, the tale of the Mary Celeste serves as a chilling warning, one of the greatest maritime mysteries ever recorded, a ship with no crew and no explanation. And the haunting question remains: what drove the Mary Celeste's crew to leave? What unspeakable force pushed them over the edge? Perhaps deep beneath the surface of the sea, the answer lies waiting to be discovered.